Research and Content Lead here at Nimbus 90, and I would like to wish you all a very warm welcome to the finale of the Chief Disruptor Breakfast Club Series 2, The Innovation Mindset. And today, our guest disruptor, or really perhaps even a champion disruptor, I might say, is Tarv Nijjar from Mars Inc. And I'm going to introduce Tarv in a minute because I have a really good... It's a real treat. Tarv is basically doing cutting edge work in a leading organization where innovation is, of course, an essential ingredient. So before I move on to chat to Tarv, and he'll tell us about some of the work he's doing, I just want to welcome everybody again. I know that more people spend the first few minutes joining, so welcome to those of you that have just logged on. We are very excited to have you with us. We want to connect all of you. We know that people that are listening to this are forward-thinking community of business and technology leaders, and we want to connect you with people and the ideas to help you fuel innovation and inspire change. And that's what we hope to do here at Nimbus 90. And so with the Chief Disruptor Breakfast Club, what we want to do is, first thing in the morning, early doors, is expand the mind and deliver a bit of insight with your coffee, power up that grey matter, and inspire you with ideas. As we know that teams and organisations are adapting to lots of different ways of working and looking for sort of new ideas at the moment. I'm about to interview Tarv. I'm really excited about today. And as ever, please do submit questions as and when they come to you via the special Q&A box. That'll be on your screen. And I'll try and get through as many as I can. And I think there'll be a lot that people would like to ask about this morning. So without further ado, I'm absolutely delighted to spend this morning with Tarv Nijjar, Global Leader, Strategic Initiatives, Digital Technologies Global at Mars Inc. Now, Tarv has spent about a decade at Mars in a number of roles at the intersections of technology and business. And has actually just completed 2 years of study at INSEAD Business School on leading in a transforming world. Welcome to you. It's lovely to have you with us, Tarv.
Thanks, Jess. Yeah, it's lovely to be here as well, and big thanks to the whole Nimbus 90 team for having me. Thank
you very much. So, Tarv, your role as Global Leader, Strategic Initiatives, Digital Technologies Global, that's a relatively new role, I think, isn't it? And can you tell us a little bit about that and your work at Mars to start off?
Yeah, it's also a bit of a mouthful, right? I never actually hear you say it. So yeah, absolutely. And I'll just quickly take you back. So as you said, 10 years at Mars, the journey started. So my background's in computer science, but when I joined Mars just over 10 years ago, I actually started in the field in the UK chocolate business. So calling on retailers, working in sales. Did that for a few years. Then I moved into sales operations, again in one market, working in our chocolate segment before chocolate and gum segments came together to be confectionery. And then around 2015, I moved into the global sales strategy team, and that was really a privilege to be at the front of leading the customer transformation of the whole of Mars Inc. So it's hugely exciting for me. And really enjoyed that journey as well. A lot of learning along the way. And then I moved, and the great thing about Mars is, they really encourage you to learn and do new things. So I actually moved from strategy into finance. So I went and spent a couple of years in finance, again, leading this time the digital transformation of our finance function. And then as of last year, there was always lots of connections between myself and the whole digital technologies community, because it's so immersed into everything that we do, across the business. And, had some amazing conversations with the leadership within digital technologies. And then we were looking for the right fit. And I moved into digital technologies towards the back end of last year. With, like the last two roles, a blank canvas, really. So, I think, Jess, you and I talked, job titles are quite vague these days, but essentially it's been really amazing, over the last, kind of 6 months or so, to be able to really carve and shape out what that role means and some of the things that I'm getting involved in, especially with obviously the unforeseen circumstances of what we've gone through, everybody's gone through this year in 2020 has really helped to continue to shape that role further and get me involved in some really exciting different topics.
Excellent, thank you very much, and really useful to understand how you kind of moved around the business, and I guess know the business really well, and not only that, but participated in digital transformation, which, you know, for some people is still a relatively nebulous term. So it's brilliant, because today I think we can bring some of that to life and some of your experience. I mean, the purpose of the Chief Disruptor Breakfast Club, this series, we're looking at innovation and what the innovation mindset is, and then really how innovation also links to kind of disruption. And what's your take on what innovation is, especially in today's world, which I think feels permanently disrupted, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I can share my experiences and also what I've learned from the INSEAD journey. So, you know, we're living in a very, you know, highly uncertain world at the moment. So innovation is essentially creating something new in times of uncertainty. And in terms of types of innovation and types of uncertainty, firstly, you know, looking at innovation, there's different types of innovation. There's this growth innovation, which is essentially bringing something completely new to the table for any company. There's efficient innovation, which is essentially, you know, compressing an existing process or business model to be able to bring something new to the table. And then lastly, there's incremental, which is obviously adding an additional layer of incremental value to an existing product or service. And then, you know, layering that to see obviously which of those are going to be successful. You've got different types of uncertainty, and one of those is demand. So actually, you know, the product that you're creating, is there an actual demand for that product? Secondly, you know, is the technology available? So, you know, over time there's been certain innovations that can happen now based on technology versus what could have happened years ago. You know, one example is obviously AI and machine learning with the ability of having lots of data and compute power. Now, you know, we can do things that we couldn't have done many years ago. And lastly, external. You know, it's really important to look at what, you know, other companies are doing as well and what's happening externally to be able to look at the type of uncertainty. But we're living in a VUCA world, right, which is around, you know, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And some examples of, you know, of that is, you know, there's essentially a concept which is around attack from below and attack from above. So when you're looking to innovate, you can look at, you know, coming in at the lower end and kind of trying to, you know, come into a market if you're trying to come into a new market. And one example of that is the steel mills. So I think, you know, some of the huge steel mills years and years ago kind of had their existing processes and they knew how they, you know, would make steel. And there was these kind of smaller startups kind of that were taking scraps and kind of, you know, the quality wasn't quite there, but they were churning out lower end kind of production, and the big mills, you know, the big companies weren't really worried about it because of these, you know, these new companies were kind of, the quality just wasn't on par. But over time, quality's got better and they've taken more and more market share. Similarly, if you think about attack from above, that's taking the more premium and kind of, you know, higher end of something. Tesla is a great example there as well, you know, essentially coming in with their offering and model and actually, you know, looking and pricing at a very high level at first. And then now, as you see over time, they've started to become a bit more affordable, you know, for everybody. And again, that's kind of looking at two different innovations at two different parts of the scale. And lastly, there's, you know, something that I've learned, there's discovery behaviors that we can use to help us innovate. One of those is cognitive, that's around association. So associating different things, and four of those are discovery, and that's around asking the right questions, observing, you know, who your end user is and what the end user does and how they work through the process that the innovation will work through. Experimenting, so making sure that you're not, you know, scared to actually do short experiments and learn at speed, but also networking as well. And one real example which really stuck with me, you know, in terms of association, I'm always inspired by, you know, really, you know, successful innovators, and one of whom is like Steve Jobs, for example. And just, you know, I've shared this with you. And one story which really stuck with me was the creation of the iPod, which has the circular dial on the front. And when that was, you know, the whole kickoff of that started, you know, Steve Jobs asked his team to actually create 1,000 songs for somebody to be able to put in their pocket, because MP3 players already existed. It wasn't a new offering. And actually, when they were designing, you know, one of the designers was actually playing with a rotary lock. And from there, somebody else saw it and actually took the rotary lock and realized you can go through a lot of numbers very quickly. And the inspiration of the rotary lock was then taken to the dial that you see on the front of an iPod. That's an association. So yeah.
Thank you, and a good story to have, actually, because I think we all need reminding that if you look at what the iPod kind of spawned, and the revolutionary effect that it has, so sort of how critical innovation is, and how even things that, as you say, we're already very familiar with can be innovated. So thinking a little bit about disruption, because again, this episode is about how to disrupt without alienating people. And one of the reasons why you are perfect to talk about it is because when we've spoken in the past, I know that you're a big believer in change management. And I think that is a fundamental part of doing disruption really well. And a lot of your work is about disrupting. In a global organization that, yes, is very used to innovation, that's kind of the lifeblood, I guess, at Mars. But it's also an organization that just has to do things in a very consistent and standardized way. And I guess, what are some of the people challenges then in bringing disruption into Mars when you have those conditions?
Yeah, great question, Jess. And the great thing is, empathy is the biggest thing that you've got to really look at first. And as I've mentioned, I've previously worked within the market, and I still got loads of friends that I connect with regularly and work quite closely within the markets. Then obviously when you move into a global role, you have the view of what you're wanting to try and do from the center, but you essentially, the two have to meet, and change is not a linear process, and you just got to accept that there will be a lot of pain along the way. But the fact is, you can't convert everyone at once, and you've got to understand the landscape. And it still stays with me. One of our leadership team actually said to me about 5 years ago, when I asked their own, this was 5 years ago, view on the actual topic, and they said, look, you've got your North Star. And I know, in times of high uncertainty, that North Star is moving. But essentially, you've got your North Star, and you've got to move towards your North Star, and you can't take everybody with you from the start. So essentially, the way they explained it to me was like juggling balls, and some of the balls will drop out, and some of the balls will kind of pick back up. But you've just got to keep moving towards where you've got to get to. And I've always found that really inspiring. Also, as well, though, you've got to, as you kind of try and bring people on the journey with you very early, you've got to make sure that what you're trying to do seems and is fair. So, engaging and framing in the right way, debating in the right way, and then actually decide, when you make a decision, explaining the trade-offs for that decision, having those people part of the execution. And, with the change management part, making sure that you have a clear and consistent vision, communication is consistent, making sure that you create the right coalition and allies, which is really, really important as well. You're going to have resistors and resistance, and that's okay as well. Sometimes you can have people that are resistant, but actually, that can be helpful because they're giving you a different view that you haven't thought about. So it's good to take that on board. And also, make sure that you have the right progress markers in place to be able to move forward with whatever it is you're doing. And lastly, there's a massive piece around political change. So making sure that you don't underestimate the political element of, what you've got to actually do to be able to influence, and how you need to influence with different, styles to be able to do that. And then the cultural change, and that, is around people, process, governance, and the assumptions being quite dangerous. And there's another little example that I can share with you here, and it's around, I think a lot of us probably on the call will have a Gmail account. And essentially, when the idea came up, when the designer who came up with the idea of Gmail, actually went to his manager and said, I'm thinking about being able to create an email account, and actually, adding search functionality to email. And at the time, I think a lot of us had Yahoo or Hotmail, email accounts. And the manager thought it was a terrible idea, and said, look, tell you what, go and get 10 people in the company that like the idea, and come back to me, and then we'll see. And he, the person went away and spoke to 10 different people within the company, and kind of, changed some different things. And they came back and said, I've got 10 different people now that are really on board with the idea. And the manager said, this is great. Why don't you go and get 100 people now? And then he went, okay. And he went away and he got 100 people. And essentially it worked its way up until they had 1,000 people on board to actually like the idea internally before they even thought about releasing it externally. So it's, taking that time to make sure that you bring the right people on board at the right time.
Wow, that again, an excellent story, but it also shows, I guess, to some of the battles in trying to bring an innovative and a new product to market. I guess getting 1,000 people, I mean, that, you know, that is impressive. One of the challenges, though, is that things need to be done at speed. And I know that in your work, you very much know this, and you've recently led some cutting edge agile, I suppose, initiatives at Mars, where failure is actually a fundamental part of the process. I mean, can you tell us a bit about that and sort of what the results were?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we've basically been on this journey, and you know, big kudos to our digital technologies leadership team. And we've got this kind of ethos now about moving at 100x. Everything that we actually do is around moving at 100x. And the way we actually try and bring that into life is with something called the Mars Digital Engine. And you can, you know, it's been talked about already externally. And that is really, you know, finding the right problem to solve, or the right micro insight, being able to analyze and solve that, you know, using analytics, deliver the actual, you know, delivery using a data-driven agile approach. And then those that are successful, be able to scale that. And, you know, during COVID, as I mentioned earlier, there's a you know, a lot of, there's a massive need to be able to partner with markets, because essentially, you know, that's where, you know, everything's pretty much happening. And we had this concept to think about, okay, you know, can we get this kind of 1 week iterative approach where you come together and you think about bringing human insights and data to come up with some hypotheses. And then you test those hypotheses out, you know, over the next couple of days. Some of those won't really go very far. They'll kind of just, you know, stop there. Some of those will be worked on further, and then, you know, you'll make a decision to turn that into an actual agile sprint, you know, by the end of the week. And there's this concept that was kind of launched by the leadership, which is 100 micro insights in 100 weeks. So it's really looking at what are the micro insights of what's happening, and which of those will actually, you know, be able to return massive value for the business, and which of those will just actually be exactly that hypothesis that we actually test and learn from, right? Because it's great to actually, you know, to test something, to fail, but also being able to continuously experiment and learn from those failures as well. And lastly, you know, when you talk to people, you know, there's this piece around agile, and a lot of people say, oh, you know, agile is this new thing. Actually, agile is not new, right? And there's this whole example of flight. There's a gentleman called Samuel Pierpont Langley, who actually was backed to be the person that was going to help us all fly, you know, for the first time, and he was given $1 million by the government. He actually only created 2 experiments in total to be able to try and get, you know, humans to fly. Both of those failed, and in parallel there was these brothers called the Wright brothers who owned a bicycle store, and they were doing 5 iterations daily, starting off with a bike with fins, and they kind of worked their way up to eventually be, you know, the people that are accredited for human flight. And when Samuel Pierpont Langley had his second experiment, which failed, the New York Times said it would take, you know, I think 100 years for humans to fly. The Wright brothers did this 9 days later, and that's 100 years old. So for me, that's agile actually being, you know, demonstrated a very, very long time ago. So it's not new.
Yeah, absolutely. And so many of the things I think today that we feel are absolutely brand new. I mean, there are some excellent historical examples that and that humans have been thinking in this way. And already I can see a comment coming in that is an excellent example. We're all very excited by the shiny world of tech, aren't we? And yet, you know, these principles have been around for some time. Before I want to move on to another question, but before I do, I would like to just remind everybody that we have a Q&A box. Pop a question in there for Tarv. Tarv has worked on lots of different aspects, and especially digital transformations at Mars. And I know that there'll be 15 minutes for questions. So do pop them in there, and then we'll move to those in a second. Before that, I guess one of the things that strikes me, and again, having listened to some of the work that you've done, and particularly sort of the 100 micro insights, and the world of AI that we are entering, or some of us are operating in, some of us aren't, is very complex, and it must be very exciting to work in that area. But fundamentally, it needs to lead to better business decisions. It's great having more data. It's great having access to more data sources, but it has to lead to better business decisions. And I think what I guess I don't understand is how you get from that complexity to better business decision making. And that's something that you have to do and take people on that journey. So how do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's one answer for this, but there's one that, I think lately has really inspired me. And, since COVID, I think there's so many people that I've spoken to in the business that are doing forecasting of some sort, or doing scenario planning of some sort, using AI in some different way. And actually, the example I'll use here, there's somebody called Annie Duke, who you guys may know, and Annie's was a professional poker player, and she's got a book called Thinking in Bets. And the concept that she brings to the table is, how can we make, to your point, Jess, better decisions with the information that we have? And that's first and foremost, when you take the hypothesis, it's starting with the why. Why are we doing it? What's the problem that we're setting out to solve? Who are we solving it for? Making sure that we stick with that user-centric approach. And there's this piece that Annie talks about, which is this confirmatory and exploratory approach. Now, the confirmatory is actually this, confirming what we already know. So, you may know something, already, and you want to actually be able to confirm that hypothesis. And what you'll actually do is you'll use data and be able to actually confirm your hypotheses. And the goal there is to be right. But it's also, I think, today, the world that we're living in, it's not just about confirming what we know, it's about uncovering what we don't know, uncovering new insights. And that's using this exploratory approach, which is Bayesian approach, which is around, okay, let's come up with hypotheses, many hypotheses, and let's actually use data and, multiple different data sources, that we may not have ever used before. And the goal there is to actually be accurate. But overall, it's about the reinforcement learning, where actually the goal is to learn. So that's really my kind of my answer to that question there for you, Jess.
Thank you very much, and an excellent book recommendation there as well, which is always helpful. I know that everybody is always looking for more things to read and more insight. I'm going to move to some questions from the audience, because we've had a few come in, and they're all excellent questions. So I'm going to start with the question from Sam Patel. So with your 100 micro insights, were they more aligned to service changes or actual products?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think more so to actual products. I think it was more around, how can we better service the consumer? How can we actually meet the needs of the consumer, especially during a time of high uncertainty? One example, it was great when we were talking about gum, which is obviously one of our within our confectionery segment portfolios. And actually, we had the insight through social listening was that people were talking about wearing gum under masks, essentially to prevent bad breath, things like that, which was, hugely insightful. So yeah, absolutely. It was around products and to be able to service the consumer.
Another question about, I guess, handling challenge, which is a part, as you've mentioned, of innovating and disrupting. And a question from Shima, which is, please recap your advice on how to handle opposition when you're starting a new venture.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, opposition can be good and opposition can be bad, right? So you're going to get the early adopters. So firstly, map out your stakeholders, essentially. I mean, literally map out who are the key actors and players that you need on board. Look at what you need from them. Look at where they are today and where you need them to be. Do you just need them to be informed? Do you need them to be an active kind of supporter of what you're doing? Do you need them to actually be somebody that is doing things for you? There'll be people, if we think about people that oppose you, there'll be people that will oppose you, but actually there's not a lot of value they can add to what you need to do. And essentially, as you create mass, they'll get on board, they'll get on the bus, as I like to say, right, eventually. And actually trying to invest time in those people are actually, draining your energy. There will be others that are opposing, and they're a good opposition, right? Because actually you need that, you need to bring them on the journey with you as well. And you need them to be able to input with conflicting ideas to what you're sharing and outputs, to be able to actually come out with a much more better output, which will be a lot more sustainable and successful for the longer term.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's excellent advice about focusing energies and just trying to kind of separate the objectors from dissenters and that kind of thing. And it's a fine balance, particularly, I guess, in a global organization where you're not always face to face with people, and certainly nobody is face to face at the moment. Another question has come through, and this is really about cross-organizational collaboration, which is a big thing. So, Tarv, love the stories you have shared of innovation through the ages. Cross-organizational collaboration is becoming more common during this time. And what does innovation across organizations look like, and how does it differ from the internally focused innovation?
Yeah, so if I take my understanding of that, and this is really insightful, you know, everybody kind of innovates within their different bubbles within an organization, and within their different functions within an organization. And actually down the line, when you try and connect the dots, sometimes they don't connect, right? Because obviously everybody's kind of been going at their pace. So now more than ever, it is essentially really important to take a step back and say, okay, you know, if I work in function X, how does that then link into function Y and function Z, and get those guys on board? Look at what they're doing. So, you know, before you start an innovation, speak to the other functions, whether that be, you know, locally, globally, you know, however that is. And the way we do that, you know, it's quite interesting, is start with a very focused scope, so that, you know, if you do start an innovation, you can prove value very, very quickly. But at the same time, you're not going completely off with the scope, so that, you know, it has to be brought back. And secondly, you know, I talked about the digital engine. We start everything with user centricity. We have a huge user centricity area within Mars, and that really calls out the needs of all the different personas or the customers. And those customers can be internal and external. Bring everybody to that meeting, right? So essentially, it's a great way to not just understand the needs of what it is you're trying to create, but also align cross-functionally, you know, the business.
And on that note, actually, and it's good to, as you just mentioned, kind of bringing different parts of the business together. But we have another question, which is, any successful innovation is primed on timing and adoption. And how can we better bring customers along the disruption journey and actively be a part of it, which is very interesting.
Yeah, ask them. I remember we had a session with our leadership, and, you know, the question was asked, how or when was the last time that we went and spoke to a consumer? And I remember having, you know, been part of a session a year or so ago where, you know, we actually brought consumers in and asked them their opinion. And, you know, if we're really solving for a consumer, you've definitely got to bring their view. So it's not just about internally, because otherwise you're just going to be in your own little bubble, right? And network is really important as well. So you've got to have the internal view, you've got to have the consumer or customer view. I mean, we're massively in pet care as well, so our consumers are obviously very different to our shoppers there. So it's the pet owners there, for example. But at the same time, you've got to then, of course, you know, look at what's happening externally in other companies. So you need a rounded view to be able to help your input.
Do you think then, I mean, you know, I know that you work with masses of data, you know, you have a computer science background, so you're used to that. But are you seeing, I don't know, are you seeing a resurgence of kind of the qualitative insight or a focus on that? It does feel that we've kind of shifted a lot away from that in the past few years. Do you think that that's coming, I don't know, resurging in importance or coming back somehow?
Yeah, I don't think it ever went, Jess. I think, you know, and you know, even though my background, you know, years ago was computer science, I did a lot of business roles. So actually my last 10 years or just under 10 years has actually been in the business, and not focused, you know, heavily on the digital technology side. But, you know, numbers on their own mean nothing, to be fair, right? So, you know, you absolutely need to have that relevance and the actual kind of understanding. So you need both, is my kind of view on
that. A couple more questions before we wrap up. It's good, we're managing to get through quite a few, but thinking about the situation that we're all in, a global pandemic, businesses are reacting in lots of different ways. How do you think that COVID-19 will change innovation or kind of change some of the business norms that we've grown used to? What's your view on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the pandemic has created a high level of uncertainty, and actually, you know, high levels of uncertainty need to create new ways of working to be able to innovate. So, rather than your typical, kind of way that a lot of companies have worked for many, many years, this is a great time and, to start working in shorter sprints, more, continuous experimentation, focused kind of scope, and be able to continuously learn. And again, going back to some of the points I've already mentioned, by doing that, you can do a lot more, and you can learn very quickly on those that will be able to be, to grow. I don't want to say scale, because how do you define scale, right? But really to grow, or to fail and happily fail. And you've also, one of the pieces, you've got to make sure yourself and your organization is comfortable with embracing failure. That's really, really important as well.
Another question, and this is about people again, but bringing really senior individuals along a disruption journey. I mean, how do you do that? Because sometimes those people aren't as accessible, incredibly busy as well. What's your advice on that?
So you've got to, it's a good question. So you've got to have the why nailed, essentially, why you're doing things. And I think, from a senior person point of view, as long as we're not duplicating effort that somebody else is already doing in the organization, and as long as the why is clear and essentially what the why could relate to, you've got a better chance of bringing those senior people not only on board, but helping to actually deliver your message themselves as well, because that has a lot of weight behind it. And one thing I will say on innovation, in terms of measuring success of innovation, as we start an innovation, don't use your typical, same KPIs that you would to measure the success of a very mature product. So, at the start, think about, what is it you're setting out to do, the customers that are converting, the customers you're retaining, and, some of the things, the kind of feedback you're getting from whatever it is you're doing, which is very different. It's a way to actually measure the success, which will get senior leadership on board. And as the product then matures, then think about, linking it to the typical KPIs, how you normally measure things in a business.
Absolutely. I think mentioning KPIs there is really critical. I know it's something that certainly in the last few years, how we measure and how businesses typically measure things versus new metrics that are required to kind of understand the world we're living in, particularly when we're dealing with masses of data. And as you say, really experimental cultures. I think that's an excellent point. One last thing then, because we're nearly out of time and it always goes far, far too quickly. There's two things. Firstly, if people want to find out a bit more about the 100 micro insights, I think that's sort of been published, has it, on Harvard Business Review?
Yeah, absolutely. So our Chief Digital Officer, Sandy Adlani, talked about it, I think about a month ago. So I'm sure you can Google that and find out more about that, and the digital engine as well.
Fantastic. I think that would be really useful, because really sort of cutting edge projects there. And last but not least, I mean, can you sort of give us 3 headlines, I suppose, that the audience should take away from today?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll link one, back to our purpose at Mars. So we launched our new purpose in 2019, and it's so important given what we've been through. And purpose is, the world we want tomorrow starts with how we do business today. And that's really important in the sense of, obviously, the future you want to build really, starts with how you change the way that you're working today for those things that are not actually working. Secondly, in times of high uncertainty, you've got to also look at new ways of working. So being able to adopt agile, but also not saying that is the only way to work, right? So that's probably my second takeaway. And thirdly, don't be scared to fail. Fail fast and fail cheap, and be able to, ensure you bring other people on the journey with you from the start. So it's really important as well.
Tarv, thank you so much for that. And I actually really love the way that we've discussed failure. It's not that easy to do in these environments and in business environments, and I think publicly, but it is such an important part. And it sounds to me, particularly with the 100 micro insights, that kind of that embracing failure is critical, and moving on from it as well. So thank you so much. And thank you to the audience for all of your questions. Tarv, that's been a really fantastic and insightful interview. Thank you so much.
Yes, thanks again for having me. Been really, really enjoyed the session with you.